So the reality is, if Allah deceives people for 600 years, then that means that he is an established deceiver, an established liar.
Yes.
And in your own hadiths, you wouldn't trust someone in the chain of hadiths who was a liar, so you wouldn't trust Allah if he was in the chain of an hadith about Muhammad. You would see the name Allah in the hadith chain and you would go, well, we can't trust this hadith. It's da'if. Why is it da'if? Because Allah is a known liar. Now, if Allah is a liar, how do you know he's not lying to you about what he said about Muhammad?
You literally apply that argument to literally everything you say. That's a
Go on then,
flawed
do it.
foundation. You
Do it.
literally just said, if Allah did this, therefore it was a deception. And how could
What
your
else would you
Allah-
call it?
How could your Allah?
What
allow
else
such
would
a
you
thing?
call it?
We don't know his.
What else
the
would you
reason
call
why
it?
he did it.
That's not my question.
No,
I didn't ask the reason why he did it.
You call it.
What
deception.
else would you call it?
What else would I call it?
What would you call it?
God's will.
God's will.
Yes.
What happened? Describe what happened to people. What did people see on the cross according to the Islamic perspective?
From the Islamic perspective, the true believers knew it wasn't.
No. What did the people who saw that man on the cross that they thought was Jesus, what did they see?
They saw a crucifixion.
Of who? From their perspective.
The people who wanted to see Jesus crucified.
What did they see?
They saw Jesus crucified.
And was it Jesus on the cross?
No.
Was
Not according to Islam.
So in other words, they saw something that wasn't true. Is that correct?
If God willed for certain people to see that, then yeah. 'Cause there's
Yes,
people who-
yes, it is
who-
correct.
'cause people.
What do you
there are
call
people-
it?
People who wanted to see.
If I tricked you into believing something to be true that wasn't true, what would you call me? A liar. He said he would call me a liar. So when I trick him into believing something that's not true, he would call me a liar, but he won't call Allah a liar for doing exactly the same thing.
To the non-believers, not to the.
Oh, does that make it okay then?
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
What,
Yes, it does. James, bro.
Are you saying, is it okay for
Right.
God to punish the non-believers? And you go,
Right.
is that okay?
Bro,
Everything you say.
do you want to jump into the debate?
You've twisted it. You've twisted
Do you want to jump in? Jump in.
Understand it.
So this flawed foundation that you've made is the idea that God would never lie, and if he deceives, this is the God you believe, right? Did Abraham believe he was going to sacrifice his son?
Yes, Abraham believed that.
You believe it?
Yes.
God told him to sacrifice his son.
Yes.
Did he deceive him?
No.
He didn't deceive him.
No.
No, it was just
No.
No.
Let me explain. Let me
Go on,
explain.
let's hear this
Let
argument.
me explain.
Yeah.
Yahweh did command Abraham to sacrifice his son. That command was a true command until God abrogated the command. Muslims believe in the concept of abrogation. No words of God were a lie. When God said to Abraham, sacrifice thine only son Isaac, he meant it. It was true. And Abraham was willing to submit to God and sacrifice his son, but God abrogated the command. Muslims believe in abrogation, and that is all that occurred in the story of Abraham.
Let me just sorry,
No,
sorry, man,
go on.
I can't do two people, right? Let me just use your exact same basic argument.
Yes.
Right? If I tell you, oh, we're just going for a coffee, mate, and we're going down to Pret.
Yeah.
And you say, oh, that's cool. And in your head, all you think is that we're going to Pret.
Yeah.
But once we walk into Pret, or I take you somewhere else, it turns out it's a surprise party for you.
Yeah.
Was that deception?
Was that deception?
Did I deceive
Yes.
you?
Let
Right?
me reply.
I'm
Let me
using
reply.
the-
Let me reply.
Let me just reflect
Let
my
me
argument.
reply.
No, just because you
Let
feel like
me
you wanna
reply.
dominate the conversation,
Let me
just
reply.
Let me just finish.
You've asked the question.
Finish it.
Okay, he's
Let
going to
me
finish
just
it. Go on.
finish
Go on.
it.
Go on, Mohammed.
You just said before to that gentleman
Yes.
that if I was to do X and I turned out to be Y,
Yep.
did I deceive you? And then you went, oh, exactly. So you would have called me a deceiver. Therefore, I'm going to reflect that on your God
Yep.
and call him the great deceptor.
Yep.
So therefore, your whole religion is completely on the ground, right? And I just give you the same argument with a story we both believe, Abraham's sacrifice. That God deceived. It could
Can
be
I
worded
reply?
that way.
Can I reply?
Do you agree at this point that at least I could frame it the exact same way that you framed it?
Can I
that way?
reply?
Could you agree to that point and then you comply?
No, I don't.
So it can't be framed.
So now can I reply?
How selective, how
Can I
convenient.
reply? Can I reply?
Oh, the
So
Christian
here,
cherry picks.
no. Oh, okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, the analogy that he gave, the analogy that he gave. You see, you're not even listening now. You're not even listening, Mohammed, because you're rattled, bro. And you're rattled because you know that you've just admitted that Allah was a deceiver. But you're rattled. So now let me explain why his analogy is wrong.
Your analogy.
If I knowingly say one thing that is false with the intention of deceiving you, that is a lie. That is not what happened with Abraham. God commanded Abraham to sacrifice his son, and he meant it. It was not a lie. It was a command. Then God abrogated the command. You can't lie in the imperative form.
Amen.
Furthermore, the analogy is false because why? According to the Quran, Allah the magician made it look like Jesus Christ was crucified on the cross. In other words, he planted a deception in the eyes of the observers and then allowed people to run with that belief for 600 years.
For no reason.
For no reason. People died because of that belief.
An army of martyrs.
People shed blood because of that belief. People built civilizations because of that belief. And then 600 years later, Allah went, surprise! I didn't really mean that. I just made it look that way. And the Muslims have a book written 600 years later by a man that was no witness to any events, who admits that his God was a liar. And my question to this Muslim is, if Allah lied to the Jews at the time of Jesus, how do you know he's not lying to Muslims today?
I'll go back to your analogy that you made. Okay. I said to you,
What? Repeat back to me my analogy then.
the analogy that if I would deliberately told you something and made you believe something
That wasn't true.
Would that make me a liar?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. And I'll give you that one-to-one analogy again.
Okay.
Okay. I say that we're going somewhere, and it turns out not to be that place.
Yes.
Did I deceive you?
That would be a lie.
Would that be a lie?
Yes.
Okay. You said that God is different. You said no, it's different.
What did I say though?
I can't frame.
What did I say?
Can I just get to the point?
No. You interrupted me, so I can interrupt you. You can't complain now.
But can I get?
What did I
No, I
say?
need your permission first.
What did I say?
Right. You said it's different because God meant it. He meant it, and then changed his mind or whatever.
Yeah, he gave a command.
Or a lesson
He
about
gave a command, and then he abrogated the command. That's
Okay.
what I said.
Yeah, okay.
Go on.
So you're saying it comes down to intent. Is that what you're saying?
No, I didn't say that.
No, I'm not saying you said those words. I'm asking, does it come down to intent?
I'll clarify.
Quickly, please.
Yes. God gave a command. God abrogated a command. Where's the lie?
Why did he abrogate the command?
He abrogated the command because the command was a test of the faith.
Okay, right. So if I was to apply the same logic and say something to you, in a sense that I deceive you about something, but I'm only doing it as a test to see if you'll really go through with it. All right, that no longer makes me a liar. That no longer makes me deceiving you in some way.
Are you aware that you can't lie in the imperative form?
Answer my question.
God gave a command to Abraham to sacrifice his son.
Yeah.
When he gave that command, it was a true command.
Okay.
It was not a lie. That was a real command. God really was commanding Abraham to sacrifice his son.
Yeah, but if I told you,
When
if I
God-
told you to punch someone in
when
the street,
God-
and got to the point when you're about to
when
do it, and then I went,
God-
no, I was only just testing to see if you'd actually go that far, mate. Lol. Okay. Does
That's
make
not a
is
lie.
that-
That's
is
a
that
command.
deception?
That's a command.
So I didn't
That's
deceive
not a
you.
lie. Yes,
So I didn't deceive you.
agreed. That's not a command. That's not a lie.
So it's not a lie. It's
Yes,
not deception.
that's not a deception.
It's not deception.
That's not a
I made you
deception.
believe that, like, I'll bet you £5 if you go punch that guy over there. And then
Yes,
you go believe.
God gave a true command. Where is the lie?
That's not deception.
With
Is
Bob's
it a lie?
permission, I'm going to give a better analogy. Is that all right, brother?
Go on,
Yeah,
very quickly.
If I'm a commander and I order my troops to march 100 meters, and after 50 meters I tell them halt, did I lie to them? No,
They know
exactly
exactly.
the same with the sacrifice
But
of Isaac.
now let's go back to Allah and the cross. Now let's go back to Allah and the cross, because your first argument is failed, Muhammad. It's been proven to
was
have
my
failed.
first argument?
Your first argument is that you've got the same thing in the Bible because Abraham commanded and made Abraham believe that he was going to sacrifice his son, and then commanded him not to.
No, that's
and
not
you've
my
just
argument, that's your
demonstrated
argument.
that it wasn't a lie.
I believe in both
We've
cases
got you
it's
on
not
camera.
deception.
We've got it on
No,
camera.
I
So-
believe in both
so,
decisions. There's not deception.
Where
You
does
say- you say
Allah?
one isn't
Where does
and one
all right?
is.
So where
Because-
does Allah command the Jews to crucify Jesus?
That's that.
Where does Allah command Jews to crucify Jesus?
When does Allah?
Where does Allah command the Jews to crucify Jesus? He doesn't, does he? No. Who wants to crucify Jesus?
The disbelievers, the non-believers,
The
people-
Jews. I seem to know your Quran better than you do. The
If you wanna use
Jews
the word Jews,
are the
that's fine,
one
yeah.
that wanted to crucify. No, the Quran uses the word Jews, bro. Like, you're arguing, you don't even know your own book. The Quran says that the Jews wanted to crucify Jesus, and then Allah says, no, they didn't crucify him. It was made to appear to them that they did. Right. So, who was it who made them believe that they had done something they hadn't
This
done?
is a circular argument. You're just going back to the same start. I'm not gonna
Because you
repeat
haven't
it the same
addressed
way.
it.
No, I have.
You
I'm
haven't.
telling you that I used the Abraham example and this example, and you're saying
The
that
Abraham
one is-
example has
one
been
is
proven
deception.
false.
It's not been proven.
Yes, it has.
Your interpretation.
You
of it is
admitted
just-
it as much when the brother used the analogy.
No, I didn't admit it.
Yeah, you did.
Listen, you are just choosing to say one is deception and
It
one
is.
isn't.
It
From
is.
the Islamic perspective, neither is God deceiving anyone.
And
But you're saying no.
Right,
You're
go
saying from the Muslims' perspective, in the case of the crucifixion of Jesus, that's a great deception.
It is.
It's a lie.
It
He
is.
allowed it for hundreds of years.
It is, and he
All right.
did.
Yeah, and didn't the time between Moses and Jesus were they not also led astray? Do
By
people
who?
have free will.
By who?
Free will.
Who led them astray?
People go astray.
People go astray. Yes, I agree. People
Yeah,
do go
free
astray.
will. God
I
doesn't
agree.
make them go astray.
But Allah does.
That's your.
No, that's what your Quran
your
says.
statement.
And the proof,
God
Muhammad,
says, let
Muhammad,
people-
Muhammad,
let people
Muhammad.
astray.
Let's try and take some of the heat out of this conversation.
That's fine.
Right? No. Okay. You know, I'm not like I like debating with
This is my
people.
first time in Speaker's Corner.
Welcome. Enjoy the atmosphere. Can get a bit intense sometimes, and I know when I first came that I also found it a really intense environment. So let's just move this way a second. Just a couple of steps. There we go. That's enough. So I just want to try and take the heat out of this conversation and get back to a reasoned argument. Okay? So I'm going to recapitulate some of the key points. Okay? The reason why I think your counter-argument about Abraham fails is because when you read the text carefully, Abraham is given two different commands. One counteracts the other. It isn't that God makes him think, for instance, like he sacrificed his son and then voila, you didn't really sacrifice your son, you sacrificed a lamb. It wasn't that kind of thing. It was that God gave him a command and then counteracted the command. That's one thing. But what happens in the Quran is that because of people's free will, if you believe the Quranic story, they were enemies of God and they wanted to kill the Messiah. And so they tried to crucify him. And according to the Quran, Allah made it appear that way. Now, Christianity, our central doctrine is that Christ was crucified. So the reason why Christians believe that is because they experienced an event in history where they believed that their Messiah had been crucified. Now, if we take the Quran seriously, and we take the fact of Christian history seriously, because these two things can't be ignored, then Christians believe in the crucifixion precisely because Allah deceived a bunch of people and made them think something that was true wasn't. Now, you agreed that it would be deception if I did something similar. But the reason why you're reticent to say the same to Allah is because obviously it's Allah. So it's about the person who did the deception, not whether it was deception.
But you would also agree that God has a plan for all of it.
Yes, of course.
So, and some things that we'll just never understand, right?
Yes, that's true.
That's in the Christian faith as well as the Muslim
Yeah,
faith.
but deception's not part of that.
So it's not about like sensitivity because I'd have to, because in your argument I would have to attribute to that to our God.
But deception's not part of that.
It's also, can I ask you a question because you're more learned
Yeah.
on Christian scriptures and stuff.
Yeah.
Is it not true that some Gospels do claim that Jesus wasn't crucified?
No.
At least one.
There's no gospel in the New.
It doesn't matter whether you think you accept it or you subscribe to it. Is there not gospels?
Okay. So let's
Or
be.
writings of that?
So let's be clear about what the term gospel means, right? The term gospel means good news, and the good news that is meant by the word evangelion, because that's where we get it from the Greek, evangelion. Yeah, right. It's talking about the resurrection of Christ. If Christ was resurrected, then it follows that he had to die. So there is no gospel that teaches that Christ wasn't crucified.
That's because it's central tenet to your faith.
There are heretical groups that say Christ wasn't crucified.
Of course, I understand that. Like you would consider them qualifying factor as because the central core to a lot of Christian belief. Western
All
Christianity.
Christian belief. Of all Christians.
I mean, there's so many sects.
Everywhere.
I'm sure there is one.
No, there really isn't.
I mean,
you're talking to a student of a religion. I did religion at university.
I respect it. But the idea is that you discard them because your central tenet is that the whole Christian faith is the idea of like sacrifice and resurrection. That's what you're saying.
That's the evangelion.
Yeah, that's the evangelion, right? So I'm saying to you, but if there is, even if you consider them heretical, right? From the Muslim perspective, one could argue that, well, you call them heretical, but I guess people were led astray and the truth got lost.
Okay, so let's talk about some of them. So you've got groups like the Donatists who denied that Christ was crucified. But and all of the early groups that deny the crucifixion have this belief in common. The reason why they deny that Christ was crucified is because they say that God can't die on a cross. So what they're saying is that because Christ is divine, he can't die on a cross, so he's not crucified. So the thing is, if you're going to appeal to that literature, bear in mind the reason why they're saying Christ wasn't crucified. They're saying Christ wasn't crucified because he's God.
Yeah.
That is obviously not fitting with what you believe.
I'm not saying that the Muslim perspective is that, like, since the death or the alleged death of the crucifixion of Jesus, that there is something that survives that validates our point.
Yeah.
I guess at this point there would be no need for another prophet. It would just be like, right, Jesus is the last messenger.
And that's exactly where we stand.
Yeah, then that's the division. But the idea is that, like that gentleman said before, like a clarification, if you will. Whether you think, oh, it's such a long time for such a misunderstanding, you call it deception, fine.
It's definitely a deception.
I don't think time really is a factor. I mean, between the prophets was a great amount of time, and each time, the reason why I sent a prophet is that the people were led astray.
But who led them astray?
It doesn't matter. False prophets.
No, it really
their
matters.
Own free will. It doesn't matter.
Can I come back on that point?
No, but let me just finish.
And then
I promise you'll get it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that. So when you say he allowed 600 years for this clarification to happen, I would say from the biblical, Quranic, Abrahamic canon, time really isn't a factor to put in the fact that, like, oh, why did he let it go on for so long? He could have just sent them out in bullet succession all the way up to today. Do you know what I mean? So
allow me to reply to that, because it really does matter who does the deception, right? Jesus said that the father of lies is Satan himself. Okay, that's the father of lies. And the apostles teach that if anyone teaches a gospel different to this gospel, even if they're an angel of light, they are accursed. So accursed angels might teach a different gospel, right? Satan is the father of lies. God obviously does allow people to be deceived. He's given us free will. He allows the devil to operate in the world. And so, in a broader sense, God allows deception. But to lay at the feet of God himself the charge of deception and say that God is the source of the lie when God is all truth. Remember in the Quran, one of the names of the 99 names of Allah is Al-Haq. Al-Haq is the truth. Where there is truth, there cannot be lies, agreed?
Yes.
So, let me finish. So it really does matter if it turns out that Allah is the origin of the lie. Because if Allah is the origin of the lie, not only does that mean that he is not Al-Haq, but it also means that from a biblical point of view, definitely, that he is akin to Satan himself. Would you agree that Islamically, let me finish, would you agree that Islamically, Iblis, Shaitan, is a liar who deceives? Right. Is it appropriate to say that Allah has attributes and characteristics that we see in Shaitan? Right. So, I am trying to defend the honor of God by freeing him of any accusation of deception. But Muslims and the Quran...
I don't say he is accepted.
Then you've got to explain to me.
Your claim.
Right, fair, that's fine. So now, here's...
the burden of proof for me is
Let me ask you a very pointed question. I want you to explain to me, since we agree with what the Quran says about Allah made it appear to be one thing when it was something else, how else would you describe that? I'm saying that is a lie. What would you describe it as? Could you describe... Wait. Let me finish. No, let me finish my question. Please, let me finish my question, Mohammed.
Once you finish...
Yes, of course. Right. Would you agree with me that we can't state that was a true statement at the time, i.e. in the first century?
What statement?
That vision that those people were given, would you agree with me that we cannot say that it was objectively true?
What they saw, you mean?
So in the first century, those Jews that wanted to crucify Jesus and saw Jesus on the cross, would you agree with me that objectively they saw something that was false?
Yeah.
Would you agree with me that the reason why they saw something that was false was because Allah made it look that way?
Yes.
Would you agree with me? If something is false when actually it's the truth is the opposite, that is deception.
Yeah, I understand what you're trying to do, all right?
Well,
I'm not trying to say like you're sneaking around. I'm not trying to attribute negative things to you. I'm just saying like I understand the framing, the path you're trying to take. You're trying to go on a literal semantic level of being like, if you say this, then you must say this, and that's what I tried to do with your analogy. But then you said,
yeah, it wasn't a good analogy.
It
wasn't a good analogy.
Can I ask you about, like, because I brought up the Gospels and saying like perhaps there are some Gospels that talk about how that he wasn't crucified.
Yeah.
And you rightly said, well, it was for other reasons. It might not be in line with the Muslim argument.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, that's fine. It's not that claim I'm making. I'm just saying like there is a complete consensus. There's a diversity of opinion. There's contradicting things.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that therefore Bible's a true chaos. No. I'm saying you obviously know more than me. During the time of Moses, he obviously had followers, right?
Yeah.
But then skip to Jesus,
Yep.
and we've got people who are not doing things right. Therefore, God required another prophet, right?
Sorry?
So from the time of Moses, there was believers.
Yep.
They understood him, they followed him.
Yep.
Skip to Jesus, things are going bad. God sent another messenger to put them on the right path, yes?
Yes.
Right, okay. Why can't that be superimposed again?
Right, okay.
And just this is I harken back to the Gospels when I say like you're saying that he allowed these people to believe that. So I'm saying that maybe there was followers of Jesus, but just like the followers of Moses, they either may have not been outlasted, they may have been killed, their word may have been corrupted over time. And then same thing happened again. 600
Can I
years
reply to that? Okay, so let me reply to that. Yeah. JC, we're going to move this way. Let's just stand this side. Let's just stand over here.
Slowly migrating towards...
Yeah, those guys are getting excitable. So let me just come. I want to come back to your argument. So what we've got, and let me pad out my answer for you, because in the Quran, if you read it carefully, Allah says to the followers of Jesus in the Quran, he says, and I will cause those that follow you, Jesus, to be successful over their enemies until the day of judgment. That's what Allah says. But historically, that is obviously not what panned out. And your own argument, your own defense of my accusation that Allah is a deceiver evidences that, because your defense is that they were true followers of Jesus, but they got overtaken by false followers of Jesus who believe. Right. But the thing is, if that argument stands, and historically it would have to, because historically my Christianity is the one that won. That's an indisputable point of history. But that means that Allah gave a false promise to the followers of Jesus, because he said, I will cause you to be victorious over your enemies until the day of resurrection. So wait, let me finish. So that means that we now have we have what I would call a deception, and now a promise that Allah couldn't fulfill in the Quran. I'd like you to address that, please. The false promise.
Kind of come back to when I first saw you speak.
Yeah.
When you were saying that Muslims aren't Christians. So I could just say, well, that promise is fulfilled because Muslims consider themselves followers of Christ.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
No. To be clear, I'll be more precise. From the time of Jesus to the time of Muhammad. Now let's just assume that once Muhammad arrives, any Muslim follower of Jesus would just become Muslim. Let's just assume that. So we're obviously not talking about from Muhammad onwards. We're talking about before Muhammad. Allah in the Quran promises the Muslim followers of Jesus that he will cause them to be victorious until the day of resurrection. So that means from the time of Jesus to the time of Muhammad, those Muslim followers of Jesus should have been victorious over their enemies.
To the day of resurrection.
No, but obviously when Muhammad comes, they all become Muslim. So what I'm asking. No, you've not even heard the question. So what I'm asking is, where is the evidence of the victory of the Muslim followers of Jesus in the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th centuries?
You gave a massive time frame. You said to the day of resurrection.
Yes, and I'm only asking. And I'm only asking for 5.
Yeah.
I'm only asking for 5 centuries.
Who knows when the day of judgment and day of
Exactly, but it's obviously after 5 centuries because we're well past 5th century by now.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I'm asking about the first 5 centuries.
If you want to put a time limit on it, it's fine. I don't care.
No, listen carefully. You've obviously not understood the argument. Listen carefully, Muhammad, to the argument.
Yeah, okay.
Allah makes a promise. Like, let's imagine you're a 1st century follower of Isa, right? That right now, me and you are 1st century's people, right? And you're a follower of Isa, and I'm an enemy of Isa. Allah promises to you in the Quran that you're going to be victorious over me until the day of resurrection. Now, I'm not interested in every single century. I'm only asking about the first 5 centuries. Where is the evidence of your victory over me in those first 5 centuries? You weren't listening. Let's imagine that we are both 1st century followers. Right. So now answer the question.
My answer is, it doesn't matter.
No, it does.
No, you think it does. It's my answer.
Go on. Right.
You're saying, but here's 5 centuries between now and Islam. Okay, because you put that qualifier, like at that point they would have just gone Muslim, and then you would just say it's fine because Islam is everyone's a Muslim. That's the idea of the Muslim faith. We just say that everyone's born a Muslim, everyone was Muslim, Adam was a Muslim.
We don't believe any of that, but go on.
I'm saying Muslims do.
Yeah.
Right. But you're saying, all right, give me these in the 5 centuries. Like that's like somehow some sort of like etched in stone condition. Like you that's another arbitrary point. You just made that point because you think it's important for something to happen within those time frame. But I'm saying it doesn't matter. We've got till the day of resurrection.
Can I reply?
Yeah, go on.
The point is, Allah has made a promise. And the promise is very clear. You obviously, I honestly, on these matters, I seem to know the Quran better than you. The Quran is very clear that the followers of Isa, at the time of Isa, are going to be victorious over their enemies, and that promise is given until the day of resurrection. Now, obviously, when Muhammad arrives, we just assume that if such a thing really happened, all the Muslims would be followers of Muhammad. But the truth is, when we look at history, the Christianity that won was my kind of Christianity. We beat all the other claims of groups that said that they wanted to follow Jesus. The Donatists, the Ebionites, the Gnostics, the Valentinians. We beat them all. And the truth is that if Allah makes a promise that these Muslims are going to be victorious over non-Muslims, and actually it turns out that the Pauline Christians are the ones that win, then that means Allah fails in his promise.
But you're just saying that he fails now.
I'm saying he failed from the time that he gave the promise. He failed.
From the time he gave the prophet
Yes,
till when?
the promise.
Yeah, but when is your time frame?
I've given my time frame.
Yeah,
From the 1st century until the time of Muhammad, just the day before Muhammad was born. That's my time frame.
That's in the Quran. It says that.
Would you like me to show you?
No, I'm asking.
It literally says.
From the time of Jesus to day before.
I'm going to quote it to you. It's going to be a bit of a paraphrase. It's not going to be an exact quote, but I've got the Quran in my bag if you want to see it.
I'm asking.
Muhammad says to Jesus, at the time that Jesus was alive on earth, he says, and I will cause your followers to be triumphant over their enemies until the day of resurrection. So he's saying that in the 1st century to a 1st century man, about 1st century followers of that 1st century man. And then, if we take that promise seriously, what we should see panning out in history is you have all these different people competing, but the Muslims are the ones that win. But that isn't what we see. What we see is that Trinitarian, incarnational Christians who believe Jesus Christ was God, was crucified and rose on the 3rd day, kick ass, conquer the Roman Empire, destroy a pagan empire, the Persian Empire, and then Muhammad arrives on the scene. So what we're seeing is history not panning out the way that the Quran said it should. That's proof that the Quran is not true.
Because you're saying that that's a false prediction. Sorry.
Allah failed in his promise. It says in the Quran, and Allah fails not in his promises. That's a quote ad verbatim from the Quran. Allah fails not in his promises. So if he gives a promise to the Muslim followers of Jesus, and then that fails to come true, then Allah has failed in his promises. So now we have a deception, we have a contradiction, and we have a failure in promise. So you've now got 3 solid reasons demonstrating the falsity of the Quran.
So there you have it, guys. Deception, contradiction, and a failed promise from Allah. Honestly, that alone is more than enough to falsify the Quran, even without diving into the rest of their so-called holy book. The Muslim gave it his all trying to defend Allah and Islam, but in the end, he was fighting a lost cause. You've got to admire the effort, but truth doesn't bend to effort, and Bob exposed it brilliantly. I genuinely hope this serves as an eye-opener for any Muslims watching. You saw it unfold, clear, direct, and impossible to deny. And let's be honest here, no serious historian or scholar turns to the Quran to study the life of Jesus. The one and only reliable source is the Bible, and it alone stands the test of time, history, and truth. Every other religion, including Islam, falls short, and today's breakdown just proved that once again. Hope you all enjoyed the video. Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and as always, God bless.